Hey folks, in week 6, your official graded, graded assignment is the short fiction discussion board, which is a creative one and a little bit fun. But I want to go over that with you, but I also wanted to go over a little bit of a preview for your next steps, because you're going to have one more week of fiction readings. But during that week, you're going to be making some decisions about which of the works of fiction that we've been assigned you're going to focus on in your fiction research paper. So I want to do some quick previews of what's coming up with that, as well as take a look at the discussion board. So I'm going to be hopping around a little bit. I apologize for things being on the screen that are not 100% relevant right this second, but we'll get there. So of course, I posted the text in screenshot form as well, but this is your graded assignment for this particular week. And like I said, it's a little bit creative, something to have some fun with. And both of these stories were on the list for last week. So you've read both of these already. The Story of an Hour by Kate Chopin and A Cat in the Rain by Ernest Hemingway. Because they're very, very short, I wanted you to use one of those to for this particular kind of fun assignment. So you're going to tell the story again, but you're going to do it from a different character's perspective. So in The Story of an Hour, actually both of them are told in a third person perspective, but they are told from very clearly from one of the characters' points of view. Even though it's a third person voice, there's definitely a focus on a particular character. So I want you to tell the story in first person and use one of the other characters. So if you're doing the Chopin story, you can choose Mr. Millard, Mrs. Millard's sister, who's basically outside the door during the actual story, or the friend who came to deliver the news. For the Hemingway story, you can choose the husband, the maid, or the hotel keeper. And do write this in first person instead of third person. It'll make it a little bit easier to really get the focus of that person. So I want you to think of the events of that story from a completely different lens. A great example of that, like I said, is the fact that the sister and the guy who came to tell Mrs. Millard that her husband had died were both outside of the door. So they're going to be wondering what on earth is going on in there and that sort of thing. So kind of an interesting way of doing it. And you can have dialogue, you can have description, you can do whatever you want with it, but just kind of take that same story and retell it. So the other thing I wanted to show you was that we are going to be turning in a, using a quiz feature next week. You're going to be turning in a plan for your short fiction paper. So I want to go ahead and go over this a little bit. You'll notice it's saved as a quiz, but this is not a test. It's literally just an easy way for me to get this information and to send you my feedback. So I'm going to preview it. You'll just go in and take it. But here are the questions you're going to be asked. Which story have you chosen to focus on for the short fiction paper? In addition to naming the story and author, share what aspects of the story you plan to cover in a working thesis statement. And we'll talk more about this next week, but very much like the poetry paper, you're going to do a formal analysis. So you could talk about the characters, the setting, the point of view, all of those kinds of things. You can also look at it from a cultural lens, a historical lens, one of the other, like a gender response kind of thing. There's a lot of ways that you can go about it. We definitely have a number of stories that are toying around with gender roles. So you can definitely do that. You do want to stay away from just summarizing the plot, but if you chose to write about if you chose to write about William Faulkner's A Rose for Emily, the narrative is very convoluted. So we probably could cover plot as one of the elements in kind of untangling what really happens in what order, because that's not really clear when you read the story. So there's a lot of different things you can do with it. but you'll have basically a working thesis statement. You will also create a rough outline of the paper, and you're going to have the list of topics and aspects and some of the stuff I just talked about there, of the story you plan to cover. And I've got an example here based on A Good Man is Hard to Find by Flannery O'Connor. You'll notice it does not have a lot, it doesn't have numbers and all that. It doesn't have to be a formal outline in that sense. It's just a list. The one thing I do want you to do, and this is something you can be looking for as you are reading the stories, is quotes that you want to use to illustrate points about the story itself. So for example, I'm just going to use one of these short ones. Bailey, the grandmother's son, she asked Bailey if he would like to dance, but he only glared at her. He didn't have a naturally sunny disposition like she did, and trips made him nervous. So that would be a quote that I could show a little bit of Bailey's personality through. So you can have more quotes, but have at least one for each of the main points that you're going to cover. And then the last thing you're going to have is you've got to have an initial bibliography. Now, you may end up with different sources. You may end up with more sources. You may find a source that you think is going to be good, and then you don't end up using it. All of that's fine. But you're going to have an initial MLA bibliography, including the story itself, and at least 4 potential secondary sources. Again, you don't have to use all of those, and you may change them, but I want to see MLA citations for potential sources. All entries should be in MLA format. You're not going to be able to do the hanging indent because of the way that this is set up. So just put them in there, but do put them in the correct order. Mark all titles appropriately with quotation marks or italics, all that good stuff. So we're going to be talking more about citing sources from the library and from the LibGuides. But while I've got it open, I'm going to go ahead and show you a preview of where to find some of this stuff. So the nice thing again about our LibGuide is that you'll notice that there is a button or a link right below the title that has the MLA citation. So if I were going to write about Gilman's The Yellow Wallpaper, I would copy this and I would paste it into my document, but of course also into that quiz. I would save all of them in a Word document so that you don't have to redo it again when the time comes. You also, of course, can use the critical analyses that are provided by the library. And so let me just open one of these, and I'm sure I'll have to sign in. Nope, I didn't have to sign in. I must already be signed in. But when you're using library sources, of course, one of the benefits of library sources is that they provide the citation for you. So again, we would take this whole thing, copy it, put it in our file, also put it in the quiz. They would need to be in alphabetical order and that sort of thing. But as you are finding resources, save them in a Word document. It will just make your lives a lot easier in the long run. So that's a preview of what's happening next week, just so if you want to be thinking about quotes and want to be thinking about, which story you want to write about, you'll have a little bit of a heads up ahead of time for that. All right, everyone, I will look forward to learning from you about these stories.